Well, for more on these talks, then, Sina Azodi joins us on the program. He's a lecturer in international affairs at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for joining us today, Professor Azodi. So, Iranian officials are saying that they're seeking a genuine, fair agreement on this nuclear program. But is that realistic given everything that we know about Donald Trump's administration?
I think it is, and I'm cautiously optimistic. When looking at Stephen Witkoff's demands that the red line of the United States would be the weaponization of the Iranian nuclear program, I am sure that the Iranians and the Americans could find an equal ground for a deal that satisfies the U.S. demands to make sure that Iran doesn't weaponize, and some sort of a nuclear program that satisfies Iranian demands. Some of the comments that Iran should dismantle its entire nuclear program, I don't think it's practical, and Iranians will not find it honorable.
So what do you think Iran's priorities are? And then I guess the second part to that question is, I'm all the more curious to know about its priorities because Iran is obviously coming into these negotiations in a much weaker position than it was in the last time around. So does it really have any cards to play at all in these negotiations?
I think that Iran has two set of priorities. One is to lift economic sanctions, which has devastated the economy, and a lot of people have suffered from them. And it's also to make sure that the United States does not take a military action against Iran. So these are two set of priorities. But in terms of whether Iran has any cards to play, I think Iranians have plenty of cards to play. Looking back to the JCPOA, Iran's nuclear program is far more advanced. They have technologies that they didn't have back then. So and they have been using their nuclear program as bargaining chips. So I think they come to the table with plenty of cards to play.
Iran's position is obviously going to depend, at least in part, on support from allies. Do you think that it has partners that are powerful enough in the region or elsewhere to help defend its interests?
Well, Iran has certainly partners, namely China and Russia. But neither would jeopardize or undermine its own interests for the sake of Iran, because Iran does not have a strategic ally per definition. It only has partners. And in the past, when you look at, for example, China, the Chinese have voted yes for all the UN Security Council resolution against Iran, and they were aligned with the United States. Russia also voted for them, meaning that they sided with the United States against Iran. So I am not sure how they will play this time around, given that the geopolitical environment has changed. Russia's relations with the United States is more antagonistic. China is already at a trade war with the United States. So all of these will play a role in how they will respond. But my view and the Iranians' view in Tehran is that they should not count on any support from either Beijing or Moscow.
So Steve Witkoff, I think, is probably going to be an important player in these negotiations. He's obviously not a career diplomat. You would think for an issue as big as, the Iran nuclear program, that would really require a seasoned diplomacy. Do you think that there's anything that Steve Witkoff can bring to the table that other seasoned diplomats in the past have clearly not been able to get done?
I think his personal relationship with Donald Trump is only his only asset. And when JCPOA was being signed, we had Secretary of State John Kerry, who had tremendous experience in foreign relations. And from a technical side, we had Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz, who was a nuclear scientist by training. But Stephen Witkoff doesn't have that diplomatic experience or scientific training. So I'm guessing that he's being prepped by some nuclear experts, and I read some reports that he's being accompanied by some nuclear experts from the State Department.
So I think it's unrealistic to think that there will be any major breakthroughs or any deal, so to speak, coming out of these particular talks in Oman this weekend. So what would success to you look like? And you know, to the contrary, what would a failure of these talks look like?
I think a success is some sort of a diplomatic truce between Iran and the United States, where each side would agree to suspend its provocative actions. For Iranians, for example, they could agree to stop enriching uranium to 60%. And the U.S., for example, in return would agree not to impose any nuclear-related sanctions. In a more optimistic view, some sort of an interim deal, like in 2013 when we had the joint plan of action, where for example, for a period of time, Iran would get some sort of sanctions relief, and it would, for example, dilute some of the 60% enriched uranium that it has to de-escalate and get itself farther away from weaponization. That's something I call success. Now, a failure is, as I said in the beginning of the interview, would the United States coming to the negotiation table with an absolute demand, less flexibility, with no flexibility, that Iran would have to dismantle its nuclear program, and Iranians will not agree to this, and which would mean that the talks will collapse quickly.
As a final question for you, sir, do you think that there is a realistic path really to long-term stability in the region without a major agreement on this nuclear program?
I think that as long as the Iranian nuclear file is closed and stabilized, I think that tensions will always be there in the region, because Iran will always be on the threshold of developing nuclear weapons, which would mean that the Israelis would take unilateral action to go after the Iranian nuclear program, which would mean that the United States would be dragged into a conflict with Iran. And I think that would engulf the entire region in a regional war that nobody likes.
Professor Sina Azodi, thank you so very much for joining us on the program today.